So I was going to talk about poetry and community, and I prepared a whole thing. So why don't we can just talk, I guess. I'll just say that this event and the readings that she has here that Anna's been doing are really a big part of what I see as being a good thing that people, should be doing for other writers and for the community and for people to see poets and get to know them and see them in the community. So one thing I did do a few years was I ran a reading series with some other people at Casa Romanica in San Clemente, and that sort of was a really fun thing to do, and it brought me into contact with a lot of other writers. And I think it was that lesson and some others that sort of was like, these are good things you should be doing when you're a little more established and have time to help out other writers and to keep yourself in the loop with what's going on, as well as some editing and then that I do. And then also as my other job as a librarian, we do this event called Literary Orange, and that's every April. So I'm kind of focusing on that now in terms of events. So what do you want to talk about? Does anybody have any questions or? Yeah, go ahead.
You use some really specific phrases in your poems, like you have a word that was like specified the biographies of saints. I was wondering where in your background, like you would.
Hagiography. Well, I'm a Catholic. I was raised Catholic, so probably just having, in a way, as an older person, examined the fact that when I was a child, I read little hagiographies. Like. We read these books called 6 O'Clock Saints, and they were sort of how wonderful these people were and the things they did, and they were definitely positive spins on their lives and very inspirational. So I think it's an interesting term because, it's used a lot when you talk about, well, like, say recently Steve Jobs died, and it was sort of a hagiographic look at him, which he deserves to a certain extent, but in other words, it left out the parts of him that were negative because people are remembering those things about him. So I think it's an interesting word. It has a lot of richness to it. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay.
Just pretty specific, but the poem Diagnosis Psychosis, and if it's just a literal meaning, I know it's related to Blanche Dubois, and it's got that streetcar. I really like that poem.
Thank you.
What? Can you tell me about the poem?
Well, it's I have dealt with mental illness and a mentally ill person, and in my family, and actually in my job as a librarian, one thing you don't know that's going to happen is that you're going to deal with a lot of mentally ill people. So I have learned a lot about it. Not necessarily something I wanted to do, but I have. And I did have an experience of being in a mental ward and what that was like. And it was, very troubling. And so I guess just from that I had to write about it. And I guess I've seen the dark. In other words, there's a misplaced advocacy out there that doesn't really help mentally ill people, leaves them on their own, and they do a lot of damage. There's also a kind of hagiography, if you will, of mentally ill people that their motives, that they can't be bad. They're sick, but they can also do bad things. So I guess that's what I was trying to get at in that poem was that, like a Blanche Dubois, this person that's going around, depending on the kindness of strangers. You're in a victim situation, you're in a con artist situation at the same time. We can get into public policy, but it's something that I feel very strongly about, actually, that there's a misplaced advocacy that has not done right by mentally ill people, addicts, or homeless people. And I just happen to have had 20 years worth of working with that as kind of a thing that I didn't expect to, but I have. So that's kind of where that comes from for me.
Can you talk a little bit more about your background on how you became a poet and
Oh,
how
sure.
you became a librarian?
Okay, sure.
And whether or not those intersect,
Okay.
if they intersect with some of these poems.
Okay. Yeah, I like the poem Library, does. Um, well, I went to, and this kind of ties into what I was going to talk about. I got my MFA at Iowa in 1986, and at that time there weren't as many MFA programs, and we were kind of, well, it was kind of an era of, everybody needs to be a business major, but there weren't as many MFA programs, and I had a sister who had an MFA in art, and I had seen her sort of just struggle along with part-time jobs and stuff. So I decided that I wanted to get a job where I could get a job and support myself. I didn't want to have to take a chance of not getting a teaching job. And I had always considered being a librarian because I had worked in libraries. So I decided to do that after my MFA. And I found that it was a really useful thing to do in a bunch of ways for my writing. One of which was, for some reason, not focusing totally on writing and poetry sort of allowed me to write more for some reason. And I had some different influences on my thinking, reading, and having that kind of a job gave me a different insight into why people read, what they're reading, met different kinds of people, intelligent people who didn't necessarily read poetry. And I saw that as time went on, I sort of had these dual careers going on, that there were ways I could bring poetry into my library career. For instance, when we have Literary Orange, I find the poets for the panel. I make sure that they're good poets and that we're not, I'm careful about that. I can help out with stuff like that for the library. And then skills that I've learned being a librarian and a manager, being able to talk to people, and I'm really good with managing, administrating, those kind of things that I didn't think I was when I was 23, 25, when I graduated with my MFA. And I've brought those to things like, planning an event or editing. I'm editing some online journals. And I find that I really enjoy the interaction with people that way and reading their work. I've helped some friends with their manuscripts. And I find that the same thing that I bring to, say, dealing with an employee, setting goals, maybe overcoming difficulties, encouraging them, I can bring to that. And I guess that's what my advice to you was, sort of a kind of a cookbook kind of advice versus maybe somebody else might give you a craft lesson or something, or the chemistry of it, is that the things you may not know about yourself now, you'll bring to your poetry career later. And to not expect things will change throughout your life. And there's skills you may get from a totally different way you go in life that you may not be thinking about now. Because when I was in school, it was sort of like, if you don't go be a teacher, what are you going to do? And actually, there are many examples of people who didn't live like that. Wallace Stevens and William Carlos Williams. And even now, I know people who are like that. And so I think it's a good thing to just keep in mind that you can be part of the community in different ways, and that you should be part of it, because everybody relies on each other to keep it going. And when you're young, it seems like a tall order, but then I think when you get older, it's a matter of, I give a little money to different publishers that I like, and I buy books, even though I can get them at my library. I buy them, things like that, to support the community. Those are simple ways. Then there's more complex ways to do it. For instance, I know several people who have actually started publishing companies, and I think that's a really noble endeavor if you have the energy, the time, the money, and they're all writers themselves. So I think those are just things to keep in mind as part of being part of a community. And I had many more details, but they were lost on the freeway. So, go ahead, yeah.
In a lot of your poems, especially in the education section, obviously, you talk about institutionalized education and kind of, you have a lot of views on that. And I
the influence that these poems come out of, kind of your view
On education?
yeah, and kind of like the institutionalized kind of
Okay.
underbelly.
Okay. Well, I'm an educated person, and I have good degrees, you know. But you know, I wasn't a good student growing up, and I had to go to the like, you know, like the school. In the high school they have that special school for the people who are failing. I was in that school, and I wasn't a good student. I wasn't serious. I had to grow up a little, and I don't know. I having raised children now with school has a lot of it has a lot of flaws. I don't want to be too critical of it, though. All the teachers I've ever known pretty much were great people, including my kids' teachers. But I think that, I guess what I was trying to get at in that education poem was that you are always learning your whole life, and you're always going to be learning, and what you think you were when you were young and what you were learning when you're young is not the whole of education. Education is also what you learn living and what you learn from reading and knowing things as you get older. I actually think that after I got out of school, I read a lot after I got out of school. I mean, I think I really, really read a lot of poetry, a lot of things. So in other words, it's not the be-all and end-all of everything, I guess. And I'm kind of a social critic, and I'm kind of, maybe sometimes I go too far, even. I don't know. Like I said, in other words, this thing wouldn't exist here without education, without people who believe in it, without people who donate money to it. It's not something to dismiss either, so I don't want to do that either. But I think that, I don't know, when I was growing up anyway, there were always these sort of petty things in education, and I think you do find them even in higher education. You find them everywhere, where people are enamored of their sort of petty rules and things, and so, or their ideas and their rigidity. And I think that you want to be open and welcoming of a lot of different ideas. And I think that when I was getting my MFA, I was going to talk about that a little bit. There was kind of a model of what you were supposed to be as a poet, and there were sort of these two competing things. And I'm going to simplify this greatly, but there was language poetry and new formalism, and it was sort of the left and the right, the Reagan era people, and people looked at it that way, that was, the right wing were new formalists, the left wing were language poets. And I think for a lot of us, it was just like we didn't relate to it at all. And there was kind of but at the same time, there were people who were very rigid and dismissing other people who had other ideas, either on each side or somewhere in the middle or somewhere on the outskirts. And there were outskirts, definitely. And I guess my feeling after being in that world was, I wanted, when we did a reading series or even working in a public library, it's like, a big picture, openness, diversity, inclusion. I think that there's something to be said for every kind of expression. Some is not going to be as good as others. When you're teaching, some people don't have the same ambitions. They are not necessarily as talented, let's say, but you have to be kind, let's say. I mean, it's almost the easiest, it's almost the secret in a way, is, so I don't know how I got into this. I guess I was saying about education. So I think that was something that I found. I had that one poem about, quoting Yeats, where he says, the Catullus scholars, does their Catullus walk that way, the way they are so bland? And Catullus is a very dirty body, scatological poet. And I think that that's a risk everybody takes in life, that they're going to become a very dreary person. In fact, Donald Hall has had a really good quote that I brought with me, which was effectively, when people talk about the death of poetry and how much better it was when they were young, they haven't probably been reading it, they haven't been paying attention, or they had some notion of it, and they're not really looking at what's going on, say, with younger people or in the world as it is today. And, you know, I think that's just true of people. You know, they want to listen to the same pop songs they listen to and things like that. And, you know, everybody does that a little bit, but so those might be concerns of older people. I don't know if that makes any difference to you. I hope it makes some sense. But on what I just said, I think community is a positive thing. I think it needs contributors. It can be divisive, but you want to be part of it in some way if you're committed to it. Like I always say, if poetry is my vocation and my work is my work. So I'll give a lot of time and energy to it, and it energizes me. It doesn't make me tired. We also need audiences. You know, Whitman said to have great poetry, we have to have great audiences. So you can support people just by supporting them, going to their readings, reading their books, saying congratulations on Facebook when they get something. I think that you'll find ways when you get older and value what you can do. I had a friend who was very good at connecting people together to work together, and she was brilliant at it, and she got people from disparate worlds to work together. But she kind of devalued it in herself, and she felt sort of like if she wasn't getting a book right away, it was sort of not worth her time. And I think that don't ever devalue those talents you have, because they contribute to it too. Let's say you're on a poetry, and we had a reading series, and we had a group of people, and there were people, you know, who were good at accounting, and that has a value actually, because it helped us that way. Don't be. So, in other words, if you're a good organizer, there's many, many people who organize reading series, for instance, or who edit. And I would just say that will change your whole life. And also when you are contributing and you're publishing, and people do you favors, do them favors, you know, do something for them. And that's kind of how it works. And I think that it can't just all be about you. You have to be helping other people and mentoring other people if that's your role. I guess that would be my last thing on that would be, let me see if I can say that better. And then be open to change. Don't become that everything has to be the same. That the world always has to be the same, or a certain kind of aesthetic is always the same, because people die that way creatively. Give and don't expect anything in return, but you'll find that people will do you a good favor later. And people are smarter than you think. They can feel it when you're trying to use them or whatever. I guess that's it. Value other people and help them as when they help you. So, okay. Thanks, Patrick and Anna, and I'm really glad to be here. It's really an honor. I think this is a great series. I'm really happy to be part of it. And thanks everybody that was in Allison's class today. That was really a wonderful experience. And for all of you who read my work, it's fun to talk to you, and just a pleasure to be able to talk about your own work with people. And I appreciate your time and attention, and everybody who came out today. And if you want me to teach at Chapman, I will. Okay, so I'm gonna read mostly some new work, and then I'm gonna read from Domestic Interior. And so since we were talking about stuff earlier today, I guess I would say I was going through some of this new work, and I would say that some of it is probably influenced a lot by fairy tale and things like that. I don't know if you'll see that, but that was sort of some of what I was thinking in some of these. You get comfortable and relax. Yesterday at work, Pam said, I think it's like slipping off really tight clothes. You get comfortable and relax. There are all these things to do. I said, I think there's real estate. No, I said, I always imagined my dad went first so he could find a nice place for my mom. That's the way he is. This is a joke, but not, you understand, and made her laugh. She said, I would like to be wearing a great-looking Armani coat and lie down and choose to die like Indians, you know, a good day to die. I said, I think that's what they said before battle, not suicide. I might not be right about that, but I know what you mean. I said, but you can't do that. What if it really is a sin to commit suicide? I said, all those near-death people who tried, they came back to report the mistake, the grave mistake, I emphasized, trying to make it funny again. I love that we have conversations like this. Me too. And then we turned our backs to each other, back to the computer screen, back to work. I do work in a library, and every 10 years we deal with the census and have census workers come in. And so you think about the census a lot. So thinking about it, I wrote this. The Census 2010. Named after the romantic poet who swam the Grand Canal, the bewildered surfer lives with his girl, his boy, in a duplex by the shore. But the house isn't a teepee in a field like where he grew, to estate with his mother and father and sibs in northern forests, bewildered, though now he is tattooed and very cool. An autodidact who reads like a tiger, his girl used to do heroin, but now she reads, and she is brighter than the supermarket checker she purports to be. She is writing a memoir, as all of us are, aren't we? His kids by two other women never visit, but his wages are garnished for their betterment, and their bodily existence stresses the autodidact's immune system. These families reside in distant apartments, maybe tents or teepees, possibly places subsidized by Section 8. All counted, all accounted for, everyone matters. They are statistics and more. Things are likely to happen as there are odds to most behavior and predictions. First love. He was on the long table, strapped around chest, waist, calves, arms not able to bend. And then I put his head in a vise and turned till he cried, but not enough to pop the skin. And I took a funnel and put it in his mouth and poured clean water in, not until he drowned, but until he gave. His metaphorical heart, the one of feelings, I took in my hand and twisted, wrung out the blood. I was a fury, I was a dove. I could defile with another and he would return. When I, inquisitor, could not in the end convert his recalcitrant soul to the true religion, I was inconsolable. All those marriages of his that followed, all those failures. The new door. Sometimes there is a man outside the door. This is the new door that the man inside installed and painted brown on the outside and white on the inside. The man inside is the husband. The woman inside is the wife. The wife has a new window at the top of the door. Standing on her toes, she can see the green vines outside twist around and around and around the brick post and sink into the earth below, which here outside is rich, fruitful, and moist. But every day now she is startled when she walks by because of the new window. The door is open, she apprehends, and her head flies to the left to see. But it's just the effect of the new window at the top of the new door which allows more sunlight, which brings in more sunlight. Two rectangular columns of sunlight drawn on the brick floor. But when she walks by the door, she sees the man outside the door. She sees his shadow in the rectangular sunlight. Maybe it was a delivery man who has left a package. Maybe it was a dairy man who came to sell special milk. So there was just a figure, dark like a suit, no face, but a figure. And what happens to her is this. He will come by every midday, and she will see him every midday until she is used to the new door and is not startled anymore. I think it's very hard to write love poems, and this is probably about the only one I've written, so it's kind of nice to have one. A dear devoted husband. Ulysses S. Grant was a handsome man. Wow. I love how the men in those old uniforms cocked their hips. The clothes look like they got dirty, and Ulysses is leaning his hip to the right, kind of messy, kind of like those sexy cowboys with a hand on a rifle and a hip cocked in the same direction. Yes, indeed, they were firmly planted in their hips. They were a little greasy, but it's faded out in the black and white reproduction. And you can't smell what it must have smelled like. Not like today, the way the world tries to smell like 18th century France. Though that was just a cover-up really for bad odors after too much gray-haired, we are all the same age palace rutting. I've looked up this photo because for a good month you have been reading Grant's memoirs and reading me things from the volume, though this is a habit of yours I don't like at all. I don't like when you read me things out loud. You make me stop what I'm doing. But you had to interrupt and tell me how you found out that Ulysses' pet name for Julia, his wife, was Poopy, which may sound something like the name we gave each other. P-O-O-P-I-E is how I spell it on emails or how I imagined it spelled when I say it out loud. And like me, Julia had strabismus in her right eye. So even though Grant is sexy and saved a nation, you are more sexy than that. Your forearms especially are nice, and you will never get so portly that no one remembers how gorgeous you were once. You will never be president, but that's all right too. And when you read me things out loud, I sometimes listen. I do. This is called hagiography, which was a word we talked about earlier. And I don't know whether I don't think they were talking about this poem though, but it's called hagiography. And has a quote by Saint Teresa of Lisieux, "I will spend my heaven doing good on earth." The hagiographies were on a shelf next to the guest bathroom on the way to the garage. We had once been that kind of family. Saint Therese, the little flower, had 3 sisters, as did I. My spiritual longing shed tears. Then I smelled roses in the air around my ears, and I rejoiced. I was filled with peace, her story in my lap. A sister's devotion weighed her down like a deep depression. She sat on the stairs with arms around her knees. Deep in prayer, I watched her. Another sister was motherly and administrative, like Teresa's Sœur Pauline. And there was one who would struggle all her life, and that would not be me. But no one in our house could be a saint or a mystic. Sisters talked like I was not in the room and bribed me with candy bars. There were visions, boys who looked like Jesus. Wasn't I there coloring, eating my candy bars? Sisters fought and held it all against each other and then were gone to separate houses, to separate orders, to separate hearts. We have been invisible to each other for the rest of our years, but back then, how I loved them like a little sister. I lived in the Bay Area for a while, and you can take the bridges all the way around, so that's what this means. Bay Bridge to the Golden Gate to the San Rafael. From Oakland to San Francisco to Marin County and back. Bay Bridge to the Golden Gate to the San Rafael. On a Sunday, nothing to do, this route. Or perhaps I stopped to see an old friend and sit lonely in her den. I did this too. I don't remember. I do remember the dizzy feeling, the driving down the mountain switchback, passing by a Zen monastery. There was a beautiful beach. No, there really is no word for that astonishing scenery, and I sat there all day alone. It was not renewing. Who would love me? No one, not even friends who rolled their eyes when I turned too quickly to see their faces after I stopped speaking. Trudging up Telegraph to Bancroft as the insane passed on bikes or with their shopping carts, shouting out and asking for me, insisting that they were not. It isn't fair to say those things. I was dying for a drink. I could tell you it was something else, a metaphor, a doubt, but the way the bottles rattled in my plastic bags when I put them out among the neighbors' remains was a real sound each Monday, trash day. Who would ever find me? Who would seek me out? Symbols of Transformation was the book he told us to read that summer. It was at 2:30 in the afternoon, and I arrived there after a lazy walk. A very tall man, I mean a very large man. I mean a Triton he was, our teacher, handsome as a god, a curly-haired movie star. He said, "Your dreams may change when you read this book, when you take my class. I've been told this happens." He was proud of himself. Jung's book really had nothing to do with the rest of the coursework of the Bacchae and the Oresteia trilogy, the Hymn to Demeter. I read it anyway. I felt mostly flummoxed. The teacher sat at the head of a table and spun yarns each afternoon of Ariadne, Perseus, Theseus, Minoan mystery cults, and he talked about misogyny a lot. On the last day, he opened it up for the young women to describe the misogyny, the myths we lived in. He was the first man who listened to us. By that I mean it was not just a joke. The young men were not invited to argue with us. We were not supposed to change our minds about it. It was not a fight. It wasn't just a precursor to flirting. In those days, it was a form of flirting to talk about misogyny to a man. Things like that are really different. My dreams didn't change, though I had hoped they would. I had hoped to dream prophecies, to become a Sibyl, to have symbols fall into my hands, to have Mr. Jung himself appear in my neighborhood, but my dreams didn't change. I do remember walking home the last day and knowing that my plans would change. Soon I was carrying a framed poster of Athena, looking at the shield that mirrored Medusa, so that she could reflect on her purpose. I would hang it on the wall in my hallway. Okay, we're doing okay. The renters give their notice. Finally, the music hurt too much. There had to be a devotion to the music that she could not abide. It hurt her ears, and the car was like a cargo hold, all that noise. There was too much gnosis and no one to clean the toilets. Discussion about sexual needs and no one to give the blowjobs. The laundry regenerated itself. It was like a superhero's nemesis's cock. But oh, things were detumescent too, of course. Electronic obsolescence, a window destined for a bong. The desk by the door had piles of piles of piles of piles. The avocado tree was crawling with macaroni. The bound journal held one song lyric, a phone number, a squiggle. It was left in the bathroom with the piss and the vanity. Okay, this is called Stem Christie, which is a skiing step, I guess, or movement. Okay, Redacted talked about the Stem Christie. And then my brother got up and did the Stem Christie on the carpet. And his best friend talked about his Stem Christie. The conversation meandered over black diamond trails, but always came back to the Stem Christie, at least it seemed to me. I was 5. Because Stem Christie sounded glamorous and fantastic, and it was a weird word, and when I asked what it meant, no one could say or cared, and the conversation became gestures with imaginary poles and hands, and a word or two of parallel, standing up and sitting down, and more laughter about hills. Invisible, under the care of Redacted and Brother, I sat and listened to this word that I would never understand. Redacted was really a wicked witch, with disgust dripping from her teeth and in her breath, and phony like Gladys Kravitz in Bewitched. Beautiful, of course, but fake like that. I would never Stem Christie, and I didn't understand how to be fake either. That was a method taught by a mother to a daughter, and my mother didn't know how to do that, which left us in a bad way in a world where the word was Stem Christie. But my brother was a catch who did everything right. Do you know those people who succeed at all those things like Stem Christie-ing? He was that. All I could do later was play the conversation alone. Stem Christie, I whispered, making the hip movements, pretending to be a person who wore alpine ski sweaters and tight pants, who stood loud and hard, baring teeth, all smiles. Okay. I think I will read some from Domestic Interior. Okay. This is called Roommates, Noblesse Oblige, Sprezzatura, and Gin Lane. How I recall that all her friends were enormously gifted and exceedingly bright. I was a dim bulb. Perhaps I knew a gifted thief. This was implied as she was of the social register of NY and I was from California and we were unfortunately back east. I'm serious. I'm as serious as a heart attack my train-riding addict hobo boyfriend used to say too often. Whoops, oops, I proved her case. Her aforementioned friends were working on committees for political reform and election to public office, and I was of a lower class, yes, indeed, Arabiste, lower really than the working class with all our pretentious collecting, belief in merit, college degrees, and not birth, belief in profits, not savings, bestowed on each succeeding generation like the sky and the earth. Unlike her, though, I liked my boyfriends really, really low. I liked the criminal class. I liked the suffering and the drinking. I liked the violence, the big shrieking, and the jail time and the thinking. Show off, show off, show off. Okay. I was in a very serious mood when I put these together. Maybe a little too serious. Okay. See, for example, Hildegard Fatima Blake McLuhan. The ditto sheet recopied each year was your teacher's piece of wisdom, and it passed into email bromides born long ago from broadsides and the tales of palpitating wives. And all these lessons have a piece of practicality and a piece of magic. Stop acting deliberately and start acting tragic, or stop acting tragic and start acting deliberately, they confide. No, they don't go back to the Pleistocene. This is about the mind. Is it about the spirit? There is kitsch spirituality as well as kitsch thinking, Bozoline. If you want to look thinner, you need to carry a big purse, she told me casually. I was reading that. And I told her, the abused stays with the abuser because she doesn't know better. That's what I read. And in another time, you can tell a witch by her demeanor, they all said. There was an account of the hanging in the popular press, in the urban legend, and here it is again. Here is that story again. Here is that received wisdom. And many have received visions, visions of the afterlife, the future, the past, castles and mansions, spirits. Their words hang on them like talons, starting to grasp. This is one I haven't read before. It's kind of I've never read this one before, but it's basically born out of my interest in genealogy. It's called Massachusetts, and it has a quote from Robert Frost. The land was ours before we were the land's, from the gift outright. The city on the hill held them, submit Hastings, thankful Sprague, Unity, Hepzibah, Renew, Ebenezer, Mercy, Patience, Experience, Devotion, Jane. He was of the most profane family imaginable, the first hanged man in the colonies. Hannah Haskins, daughter of Samuel, died a virgin, 1648. He kept his horse saddled so that witchcraft trial victims could ride away in the night. Here lies Israel Cox, a revolutionary soldier, age 94 years, 11 months. That very large lady in the diaphanous white slip striding toward the west, do you know that painting? And yes, I think so, yes, I believe in it. Free soil, freedom, progress, profit, streets paved in gold, the starving, the refuse, the refugees, and radical, radical thoughts. Okay, this poem is a longer poem, and it's kind of a tough poem. It's probably I'd say it's probably the centerpiece for the book, so I'm going to read it. It's called Hope for the Hopeless. 1. These were the diagnoses in no particular order. not in chronological order, in roughly alphabetical order in order to recreate that 6-month stretch of time. Alcoholism, Alzheimer's disease, major depressive disorder, type 2 diabetes, drug-induced psychosis, paranoid schizophrenia, and the prognoses, divorce, incarceration or committal, shots 3 times a day, certain death, and the outlook, hopeless, and the way it felt like I was going crazy myself. The sun shines on the wicked as well as the good. Let the day's business be enough for the day. I didn't write those lines. Maybe nothing I ever wrote was really mine. There is nothing new under the sun. There is a grief so deep, well, it was my time to feel it, being a human being. I mean, where I fell off my chair one time, can you believe it? I mean, I cried myself dizzy. I cried vertiginously. I prayed with every cell in my body to get through one night, one time. I mean, despair. Tears come at night, but joy comes in the morning. I didn't write that line. I didn't write those diagnoses on the medical charts, though those of us around the patients had spoken those names anecdotally many times. 2. Each week for years I had heard the voices sing, those naked light bulb, those homely Sunday voices, hope for the hopeless. I always sang along. I sang that happy song. Sunlight drifts in just right through stained glass, and I noticed that. But during those 6 months, I could not sing, could not open my mouth, though I still sat among them and closed my eyes. Sometimes I cried. I let myself be carried on the voices of the others in the room. I let myself be ferried across, as I could not lift myself. Some can heal, you know, and some cannot. It was all I had, and I mean it was all I had, that verse that I did not write, that song. Okay. Goodbye. I'm happy that this book has a couple poems in it about when my kids are little, because I sort of forgot these little details, and it's nice to have them. The house lets me take care of it the way the boy never will, doesn't know I need to take care of him. The boy pushes me away if I hug him. The chair lets me polish, wax, stands up straight, unlike trying to teach the kid good posture. The pillow plumped, fattened, flattened, hugged to put the case back on, unlike the boy who will not let me hug him. I know, whatever, he says to my admonition, be good. Running from the car to summer camp, the boy who will not let me hug him does not stand up straight. His hair stands up straight. Swim trunks long over knees, the fashion and strong tan back. Okay, goodbye, I say. Goodbye, Mom. The voice, a kid so sweet like a solitary bird at 5 a.m. Unaware, unafraid, and I go back to the house that lets me take care of it, unlike the boy who will not let me hug him. Okay. The mother becomes the mother of herself as well. 2. My heart broke like a stone thrown, or maybe this will help you to understand. The ache was an insurmountable mountain climb. So many steps out of breath, just have to give up, drop down to your death. Little boy, lower lip turning down, head lowered, eyes like starvation. Great granite mother am I. My heart broke. Little boy, Christ, remove the log from my eye. My heart broke like a stone thrown. 1. On the way there, I spent a long time crying inside me, saying, Mommy. Embarrassed, a real weirdo for doing that, but I kept doing that. And I kept crying, all of it strange, and I stood back and watched myself as I was then watching myself do all things in a monotonous, slow-motion, cotton candy, get-nowhere way. Put on the jacket and make the snack and smile the smile and give them a bath. I called out for my mommy. I was a baby, yes, and I am whining now, yes, it's true. but it's true too. And that's how a mother grows up, and that's how a mother becomes strong like a stone and like a stone thrown. Okay, I'll read a couple more. Yeah, I work in a library, and as I said earlier, you see this wonderful cacophony of people every day, human comedy enacting itself around you. And I have some friends here from the library, so this is for them. Library. And this has a quote from Andrew Carnegie: "There is not such a cradle of democracy upon the earth as the free public library." Potions and lotions which all smell gross, and regressions to the past self, pierced tongue, pink hair, potty mouth, voodoo doo-doo, Wiccan crap, fake religion born out of the Englishman's loss of the oral trad, taken up by this Betty Page tattooed elf doing spells via the internet, which I can see over her shoulder. Me, the neutral bringer to info in the building of the free housing and retrieval of information. And so I go like a psychopomp between the conscious and the unconscious world, bringing her and the guy who gambles away online his social security checks each time and therefore sleeps on our patio, and help each one log on to cyberspace, words invented by William Gibson, an American novelist, I believe, and help them print their pages from the screen. Here you go. I stand beside with no opinion, with no interpretation, and besides, there is someone else now who needs a guide to oil painting, and here he needs a book by an author that is translated from the Thai language, and the fourth request today for Romeo and Juliet in PBK. Our drunk walks to the front door carrying today's newspaper. "Excuse me, you can't take that out of here." He is, he thinks, my pal. He pats me on the back. I'm busted. I have no opinion. I cannot interpret taxes. Here's the form. I cannot give you advice for that, sir. My mother has Alzheimer's. I need to know. How can I find out about fetal alcohol syndrome? The baby we adopted. I offer her a tissue and we walk to the shelf. This is just a house. I will guide you between worlds. Take this, here it is, but now I must go. Now there is someone else who needs that stupid, trashy book by a misguided author freak that everyone's reading. Yes, we have it. I give it with no advice and no opinion. Okay. The world will ask for your greed, envy, and sloth. So write a hagiography of the day and encomiums for the week, and thank the food that you eat, and remember fondly the bed where you sleep, and bless the fresh, clean water in your spirit, and the dirty, filthy dirt in your pockets, and the sunburn you took for going to the trouble of it, and the paper cut that gave you pause. You are alive, abundant, filled with seeds and blood, able to tame and thumb a cat's soft life under your fingers, to be so kind, to be so loved. There is a reason to write. There is no reason not to write a hagiography of that woman who went to serve street alcoholics in New York during the Great Depression. And who are you? What have you done? The odd thing about this book is that there's several different tones in it, and I kind of picked the sad ones. There's a lot of poems like Invective where it's, the point is F you, and very different feel. So I'll leave that to you to discover. Okay, I'm just going to do two more. Oh, I don't want to get too heavy here. Let's see. Okay, this one, I guess, is sort of topical in a way. There's a story I read when I was in high school by Stanley Elkin called I Look Out for Ed Wolf. And it was one of those moments where I was just really transfixed by this story for some reason, and I've never forgotten it. And this man decides he quits his job and just sort of like sells everything he owns. The very last thing is a box of hangers, and goes off on this kind of journey into the night. And I just loved that story, and for some reason I've always wanted to put it into a poem, and I've tried many times, so I finally got it into this one. It's called Recession. It was an eye lookout for Ed Wolf's sale of all things he owned. He would get to that box of hangers in a minute at last. Unlike Ed, the journey was not intended. He had no skills, despite an education at California's top public university. Not true, he could sell. Unlike me, cemented to my retirement in 11 years, my mortgage to be paid off in 12. Unlike me, he would hightail it to someplace else in the Escalade he'd bought with last year's bonus. I too had attended that school. We were neighbors, but not equals. He had lots of toys, and we had zero, that old machine. He was broke. There was no business. At 16, I was torn between dying from my addiction and dying from my art, or not dying. Do you know what I mean? I smoked a dusted spleef and read, "I Look Out for Ed Wolf." Even though that night I went out and drank, danced with that muscular young man, I thought about a future where I would be cemented where I am. I would not ride into an unknown future. I would not collapse under failure. I would be safer than the room I was held in our rich house in a tapestry fable. Along the block, crisis heads held in soap opera hands, elbows on tables, working for money and money's potatoes. Drive away now, drive away to your next accident, little failure. My neighbor is going to drive away tomorrow. I won't miss him, or the drunken afternoons where he yelled with bros and then argued with his wife about not needing her dumbass permission. We could hear the instant he transformed into a poker player after sundown. A winner, a loser, a winner, a winner. He is a winner. Okay, this is called Notre Dame. And I'll conclude with this one. Thank you very much for coming. I was staying in an apartment near Notre Dame. There was a park for the kids to play. Roller skaters in front of the cathedral in the evening, and my older son joined in. We shared the floor of the apartment. Too many family members of mine sleeping there. One morning I woke up, and in the instant before my full vision came back, I saw or apprehended or felt, or however you want to call that almost seeing that happens, two angels hovering. One was male and one was female. They were there to be with my younger son, protecting him or visiting. The male especially was there to care for him. They were checking on him as he slept. I had interrupted by seeing them, and so they had to leave. In fact, the male angel stayed maybe a moment too long, and the female was communicating this message like, "Hurry up, come on." It was known to me that I wasn't supposed to see them. They were annoyed with me. After waking fully and lying on the floor before everyone else stirred, my mind wandered over to Notre Dame. My parents made a pilgrimage every year just to be near it. I loved the thoughtful gargoyle up at the top. Inside, the human souls came to visit out of pain or tourism, or death approaching, or craving union, out of loneliness and sickness, out of boredom. Candles burned their prayers for someone. What had I seen? Anything? You always doubt something like that. How could it be real? And yet, it was a terrible summer, and it required angels, real or dreamed, with my father losing his mind, getting lost, my mother losing the ability to walk, a sister comforting me as I lamented and talked my sad story while our children played together at the playground at the Tuileries. Later, when I could laugh again and tell the summer as a tale, I said that it's sad to walk around the Seine when you are getting divorced while everyone else is kissing and filming their honeymoons or new loves. Even my husband, after we got back together, laughed at that because he too had been heartsick on another part of the planet. Thank you.